Well, folks, thanks for tuning in so much today. And yes, as we get right to the brink, or we got right to the brink yesterday, with President Donald Trump saying he was going to bomb the entire civilization of Iran into oblivion if the regime in Iran didn't agree to open up the Strait of Hormuz. And now we have a ceasefire, both sides agreeing to a ceasefire. And it looks like, we'll see what happens, that there could be some agreement on opening up that Strait of Hormuz, where there are approximately 800 ships, 800 tankers, it's gigantic, that are being held up right now, most of those transporting oil and other energy projects and products. So we'll see where that goes. At the same time, Donald Trump is predicting that if the right things were done, if Iran made the right moves, we would see a golden age in the Middle East. I think there's some basis for that. We'll see if it can develop. Some people don't want to see peace there. Some people, especially on the Islamist regimes, don't want to see it. They want chaos. But we will see what develops with that. Interesting, the UN Security Council took a vote, not that their vote makes any difference at all, as far as opening up the Strait of Hormuz. And the UN Security Council voted overwhelmingly for it. But China and Russia, which both have a veto on the 15-seat Security Council, they voted no. So China and Russia voting for ongoing chaos, voting for ongoing skyrocketing prices, voting for ongoing economic turmoil in the world. Keep note of that. I want to come back to that later in the broadcast today. Quite a column and a commentary by Steve Forbes today, where he is talking about Iran's nuclear insanity. And he's commenting on the fact, and he's pretty strong in terms of saying that if we believe that Iran can be dealt with rationally, that we have become irrational and lost our minds. And he's just reminding people, and it's a fair reminder, Iran is an apocalyptic regime. They see themselves in their own prophetic view, according to their own Quranic verses. They see themselves as the regime that will bring the world into nuclear or some kind of great conflagration. They do see death as their preferred option. And Forbes, again, making the case that many of us said you can't deal rationally. You cannot, in any circumstance, allow a nation like that to have nuclear capability or ballistic capability. They will use it first to destroy, of course, and incinerate Israel, and then turning, as they already have, on Europe and eventually Canada and the United States. So he's making that point. We'll see if it has any effect. Kind of interesting, as we follow, as you regular listeners and watchers follow the podcast here, and as you give me commentary and advice, we try and look at trends that are developing. Very interesting, just in the last couple of days, this is in the United States, we see a number of cities. Cities really can set direction, either positive or negative, for their state or province or even for the country. So we have Minneapolis, which has got enough issues of its own already, now looking at legalizing what they call adult bathhouses and, as they say, quote, venues that permit all types of sexual activity. Now, at first blush, if I can use that word, these things do seem to have some kind of support in the public, but just keep that in mind. So there you have Minneapolis voting that, and then you have another city, this one's in Washington State. It is pursuing what they call polyamory protections in civil rights ordinance. That's a way of saying that people who believe in multiple marriages, marriages of 3 or 4 people, or all kind of different arrangements. Right now, society kind of frowns on that, and these liberals are saying it's not nice when you frown on somebody who says he wants 3 wives. So it first gets promoted as polyamory, poly meaning many and amory meaning love. And so people think, well, if somebody wants to have 2 wives, or if there's a woman brave enough to have 2 husbands, what is also being pointed out is this directly, obviously, would legalize the Islamic culture of a man having many wives. And so we see a city voting for that. And then you look at another city, they're actually voted, in spite of the fact that in the United States, the Supreme Court voted to lift the ban, stop the ban on so-called conversion therapy. There are many places, even in Canada, the law forbids something called conversion therapy. Now, conversion therapy, that term actually goes back into the 60s when they used to try to treat, and this is, I know we kind of laugh at this now and shake our heads, but same-sex attraction, men being attracted to other men, they said that as an abnormality should be treated with things like shock treatment and other types of therapy. And of course, that is ridiculous. But what has transpired over the years is anybody who would be counseling a young person to say, you know, maybe just wait, just consider what you're thinking of doing. You know, when you're in the adolescent years and hormones are raging, there can be all kinds of confusion about your sexuality, etc. And even talking to somebody about the fact that maybe they are not, quote, gay, if I can use that term, or same-sex attracted to the point that should determine where they're heading. Even talking to a person about the different choices has been deemed conversion therapy and has been banned in many jurisdictions, including in Canada. And that whole ban in the United States was struck down recently by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court was saying, listen, if you're a psychologist, a psychiatrist, even as a parent, you can encourage your child who may be saying, you know, I think I'm going to be same-sex partnered. You can encourage them to reconsider that, to talk about that, to think about that. And now, to get around what the Supreme Court has done in terms of lifting that ban, you have Colorado as a state saying they will just, okay, the Supreme Court said it, so okay, so what we're going to do is we'll sue anybody. You can sue someone who tries to say that maybe your destiny doesn't have to be same-sex oriented. So cities taking on certain policies and taking certain directions. We'll see if these take off across the country. And we do know one thing, that when you lift a ban on something, you always will encourage the activity. You lift the ban on legalized marijuana, for instance. I'm not getting into the pros and cons or the moralities of it, just people should know, you lift the ban on that, you will get more usage of it. You lift the ban, as many cities have, certainly in Canada, on other types of harder drugs, you get more people on it. People say lifting the ban on something that was once prohibited, lifting the ban will kind of make it all go away. But it brings back all of the attendant health and social problems that go with it. So lifting the ban on these places is going to reduce HIV and infections. This is apparently the reason they want to lift these bans. No, it only increases. We've seen that. So debate the morality of it all day long. I think it's a fair debate, but please be aware, when you lift the ban on things that were previously illegal, you will get more of it. Now, no ban on anything ever eliminates it. You can talk about any type of prohibited ban, and the human nature is always to pursue things that may not be prescribed either by a god or by a religion. But when you lift the ban on it, it will always increase. So keep that in mind, as these interesting to see these cities taking these different approaches. Well, the Republicans are breathing a little sigh of relief because there was a so-called special election. Republican congressional candidate Clay Fuller just won a Republican seat. It was a special election seat. It was vacated by Marjorie Taylor Greene, who had stepped down a year ago. A lot of people were predicting there's an anti-Trump movement and that the Republicans were going to lose that seat. It was close, but in fact, they did win the seat, so breathing a bit of a sigh of relief. But they can't by any means think that the challenges are going away. The challenges, of course, will only increase. Well, another interesting development in terms of cities doing things which could set a trend. In the city of the suburb actually of Milwaukee called Port Washington. There was a massive data center that has already been approved, actually, going ahead there for the purpose of AI. As you know, in advancement of AI, these need significant amounts of energy, and so very, very large energy centers are built to accommodate AI and to see the growth of AI. And now you've got a city saying, no, we don't want it. Now, this particular project will go ahead because it was already passed, but the city is saying, we've had it, we don't like these, no more of these. Now there are other cities who have looked. By the way, it passed by about a 2-to-1 margin, with the people on the far left doing the usual convincing that this would bring environmental destruction and the end of the world, and so people panicked and voted against it. But here it's an interesting situation. In a democratic country like Canada or like the United States, you can actually have citizens voting no in terms of wanting data centers which provide thousands of jobs just in the construction end alone, many more jobs going in the future, and then they attract other types of employment. And because people get convinced that it's going to bring the end of the world in terms of environmental issues, even though these data centers do meet very strict environmental standards, you see this moving. If this continues, what will happen is you'll see entire states that you won't have that type of activity, and you'll see other states that do have that type of activity. Those states also tend, the ones where you see increased activity, tends to have lower taxes and lower cost of living. So you really are going to see a divide, more of a divide economically and socially, with the cities that turn down these type of opportunities. And in fairness, if they turn them down, they shouldn't be allowed to gain from the taxes that come from other cities or other states that do approve those. They should really be able to, and have to figure out on their own, how they're going to replace the energy base and the tax base that would come. So let's watch and see if that continues to be a trend, these data centers being voted down by cities. Well, it's as we've said right here on this podcast, all of you have known, whether you watch it or listen to it, that I have been saying the price of oil will drop, and it will drop considerably when there's a sense that there might be a ceasefire or an end of the hostilities in Iran. And as predicted, and I'm not saying I'm the only one who's predicted this, overnight the price of oil dropped anywhere from 13 to 16%. That's in one day, because of the announcement that there's a ceasefire. Matter of fact, Brent crude, and those of you who are regular listeners, we talked about what Brent crude is and why that's a price mark. That has dropped down into the low, in the sort of the 91 to 95 amount. That's one of the strongest drops actually since way back since the Gulf War. Now it's going to take a while to materialize at the pumps, but as I said, these high prices during the Iran conflict are not going to be permanent, and that is certainly showing up to be true. We also saw, as predicted right here, if you're a regular listener and watcher, that when it looks like there's improvement going to be made on the conflict, that the stock markets will rally, that we weren't heading into a depression. And in fact, very strong global rallies of the stock markets literally overnight. Matter of fact, some of those indexes, and again, regular listeners will know we've explained how these stock market indexes work, that's jumped as high as 4%, like in one sitting, in one overnight session. Asian markets too, this isn't just the Canada-US market, Asian markets surging, and global equities generally moving upwards. Already there's a increase in the share value in the stock of, for instance, airline companies, travel companies, because people are making the bet that with a ceasefire and with some sort of form of peace in the Middle East, things will improve. So people betting there. So interesting when you look at the headlines around the world, and you know I try and curate these for you so that you don't have to doom scroll all day long. We use other people and contract out to help me to do this. So with worldwide, the headlines are this dramatic drop in the price of oil, the barrel. But good old Canadian public broadcasting, financed by the Liberal government, they came out with dismal headlines. Their headline today was, "Oil and fuel prices to remain high." It's just interesting. They don't have a story on how much it's dropped today, but it says they shall remain high. Very interesting. And that's at a moment where the finance minister of Canada, under huge criticism for Canada for pushing and nuzzling up and cuddling up closer to China and never raising the issue of forced labor in China, which then results in products being made cheaper and those products coming to places like Canada and competing against Canadian workers. So huge pressure there being mounted by the opposition Conservatives, and Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservatives, finally has the finance minister say, yes, I'm going to China, and oh yeah, I'm going to raise this issue about forced labor. I promise I'll raise it, and I'll say all kinds of nasty things to the Chinese government. So that's been an issue, and so much so, as you remember last week, the Conservative member of Parliament who had crossed the floor, and he's a person of Asian descent, and he went to the Liberals. He was really questioning whether China has forced labor. He got in a lot of trouble. He had to apologize. So the Liberals in an interesting position there, saying they're against forced labor, but still wanting to get cozier and cozier with China. We'll see where that goes. There's talking about some of the issues related to crime. CBC talking about that actually did a pretty good investigative series about, and finally people are talking about this, the stolen vehicle market, how it's huge, not just in Canada and the US. And these are stolen vehicles, very sophisticated crime organizations doing these top-level, top-notch exotic vehicles stolen. And as soon as they're stolen, they are on a ship loaded in the Montreal harbor and headed through the seaway and to Africa, Europe, and other places. This is not just a one-off. I had somebody tell me, somebody that I know and trust, that just last year they had gone to Montreal and they rented a car. When they came out in the morning, the car was gone, but they had put a contact. They had stuck their little contact tracer on that car. He looked at his iPhone. He could see it literally floating down the river outside of Montreal. Phoned the police. They said, we can't retrieve your car. We're not sure where it is. He said, you can see it right here. I've got it. It's beeping. It's floating down the river on a ship, and police saying there was nothing they could do about it. Folks, anytime we say or suggest that nothing can be done about a situation, trust me, you will see more criminal activity going on in that regard. Well, there's a gentleman by the name of Li Jiang, and he's a multi-billionaire in living in China and also does business in Canada. And he says he's going to help Canada save its energy problem. We won't have to rely on oil and gas anymore. He's actually head of a news crew and Envision, called Envision. Their office is in China. And he says he's going to show us how to get away from the energy crisis by building massive solar farms and wind farms. These devices, which have proven in some cases they can provide a minimal amount of energy, especially in areas where there's a ton of sunlight and not a lot of cold winter. They can provide a small percentage of energy, but they have destroyed the energy capabilities. For instance, reports out today in New Zealand and in Australia, which has for years relied on these so-called solar farms. They don't deliver the energy that's needed. They're very costly to build, and they also require open pit mining to get the type of glass and silicon products that you need, and the metal. And then with the wind farms and these huge windmills, people rarely talk about the costs of fabricating that metal, transporting it, and then every 25 years they have to be taken down because they become obsolete, and then trying to find the places where you in fact can rotate and recycle these. Nobody talks about that. And here we have the Canadian government, which is saying they want to see oil, our refined oil products increase, but continue to see delays in that. So huge mixed messages coming out of Canada, once again being pushed towards a Chinese developer to a direction that has proved to be not very profitable, or not reducing global emissions, and not helping energy-starved nations like Europe, which continues to finance Putin's war against Ukraine because European countries have to buy product much product made from Russia when they could have had Canadian product, but Canada for years has shut down the pipelines that would give that really life-saving refined energy products to other countries. Well, one of the things, again, in terms of trends, I think you're going to see an increase in trend in terms of not just governments, but institutions looking at how to save money. There's a story today, and you probably may have seen it or maybe not, a former U of Manitoba law dean. He was head of the faculty of law, and he actually ran from there in 2023. He took off. He was fleeing because of we're going to get to this in a minute, because of charges that were up against him, and the charges were of overspending and spending and fraud, and especially on living a very lavish lifestyle with the monies that were coming from the federal and provincial government to the faculty of law. And Jonathan Blackbranch, that's his name, he ran to the UK, managed to get himself hired over there with an institution, and couldn't seem to break the high spending habit. And the way they caught up with him was they found out that he was in fact there was a Canada-wide warrant out for his arrest, and he hadn't talked about that, so he's been punted from there and being sent home. My point here is you're seeing a trend where people and elected people and boards of these huge institutions are putting in place the type of forensic auditing that actually shows where millions and millions of dollars, because they don't get anything that doesn't get audited, will not get monitored. That's just human nature, and it's not against any particular institution. It happens in the public and private sector. And my prediction here in terms of a trend, increased number of institutions, governments, municipal, provincial, state, and national, will be proceeding more vigorously on forensic audits. That's a type of audit where you actually go in with the possibility that fraud is being committed. So watch for that. It's going to result in a saving, actually, and improve performance if they really do get moving. Well, Kanye West, and of course, these stars, these celebrities, they change their names. Changed his name. I guess he just took the last two letters of Kanye, and he's known as Ye. He had a sold-out conference in London, 150,000 people going to be showing up there for a gigantic concert, and he was just canceled because of concerns raised about his severe and significant anti-Semitism, including songs and voting admiration for Adolf Hitler, and songs strongly against Jewish people, very toxic. So somewhat of an encouraging note to see that that particular city where he's going to be playing has canceled it. A little bit discouraging, though. I think it was sold out. 150,000 people didn't seem to have any problem with singing songs to Hitler. So we'll see if that, in fact, becomes a trend. And as governments continue looking at reductions, just one department alone, federal department alone, because of pressure being brought about some of the ridiculous DEI programs, these diversity programs, which turn out to be racist, in the long run and cost huge money. That one is being, a particular program within one of the federal departments is being axed. There's going to be a saving of $80 million just over the next 3 years. And that program was called a Local Journalism Initiative. Now, it wasn't just to train or show people how to get into journalism, but in fact, it was making sure there was diversity. So spending $80 million to get diversity, they should be just focusing not on the color of somebody's skin, but can they write good columns? Can they do good investigative research? So a huge waste of money there, and that particular federal government department saying it was a waste. We're going to can that program. Let's see if this is going to be a trend in terms of shrinking government. This has been positive in the U.S. and the cost side. They now have, now people will argue, and I think they're quite right, that the cost and with AI and all of the improvements that you can do and efficiencies, to see governments continue to grow is a strange thing. Now, you don't have to go and fire all your public servants. You don't have to slash and burn hardworking people, employees at City Hall or provincial or state legislatures. Just let retirement take its course. That attrition rate is about anywhere from 8 to 11% per year. Just let that take its course, and instruct your public servants. You don't automatically have to rehire because, in fact, with AI and the tremendous efficiencies that can be saved, you may be able to not have to rehire and continue the bloat. And right now we're seeing at the federal government, they're having, in terms of on proportion basis, public servants versus people slaving in the private sector to pay the public servants, it's the lowest proportion since World War II. It can be done, folks. You can look at, and you don't have to slash and burn and fire people. Just go with the attrition rate and see what will happen and see the efficiencies that can be gained and the pressures there that can be relieved from taxpayers. You know, we like to talk on some of the trends happening in Gen Z. Report today, interesting report out of the Adelaide News, and we try and go international too, and looking at trends to see if they coincide with what we're seeing in Canada, the United States. Gen Z is ditching the gap year. More and more Gen Z are saying, you know what, loss of a year of employment or training or certainly money might not be the best way to go, and they're sort of saying, get a good job or get some money and then travel based on what you're earning from the job rather than travel on nothing. So a bit of a trend there with the so-called gap year as Gen Z is looking at financial security just rather than travel. But on the positive side of that, well, that might be seen as a positive itself. The whole area of wellness, as you probably know, is becoming more and more of a lifestyle choice for Gen Z. And you're seeing it not just fitness at the gym, but now people saying going to the gym sometimes is toxic with all of the various chemicals, especially the guys are taking steroids. They call them roid monkeys. And some of the competition at the gym. More and more of the exercise groups are actually showing up doing outdoor group workouts and looking at connecting with their health and also stress relief. But along with that, very interesting story today about something called the Gen Z pout or the Gen Z pout. And we've heard about the Gen Z stare, this sort of, it's something that's worked on, it's developed, it's not just natural, but a stare of detachment, a stare of showing no emotion seem to be a popular thing. And the Gen Z pout, the lower lip goes out just a bit, the upper lip tucks in. It's a pout, it's to show they're nonchalant, that they can't really be moved emotionally. This is not accidental, it's curated very carefully as people are staring into their cell phones more and more and just looking at the slightest little change in facial expression to capture that look. So the Gen Z pout, don't let it throw you, but you can count on it happening. But pout does not reflect happiness and joy. And so when you look at Gen Z pursuing going to all ends to get better health, which of course is encouraging, and I like to pursue that myself. But if you really want to, what can really affect your health is what's going on internally inside your own heart. And Dr. Josh Axe, and that's AXE, has a report out which talks about, and he draws interestingly from a verse in the ancient book of Proverbs where it says, a joyful heart heals the body. Another way of saying that is a joyful heart does good like a medicine. A merry heart does good like the medicine. So where the pout is reflecting depression or lack of emotion, which can actually have a negative effect, a merry heart, a joyful heart is definitely a lot better for our health. So as people like to say, turn that frown upside down. Folks, think on these things. Have a great day. Thanks for joining us.